This is the man who police say had sick, sexual, and twisted conversations with a 15-year-old girl who went missing for 6 weeks.
Mr. Menard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Matthew Menard made his first court appearance yesterday in Utah. He attended virtually from jail. His yellow jumpsuit of an accused sexual predator is much different than what we found he sports in his life away from a computer. These are pictures of Menard on social media in the days before he would be charged with alleged sex crimes in the case of Elisa Petrov. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We are still working to learn more information about Elisa Petrov and where she was for the 6 weeks that she was missing up until Sunday night when she showed up at a police station in Colorado Springs, Colorado. No one had seen or heard of Petrov since April 21st. That's when her mom dropped her off at school, and police say instead of going to class, she ran away. Why she ran away is still something we don't know. But what we do know is online conversations she allegedly had with this man may have played a role.
Mr. Menard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Here's Matthew Menard making his first court appearance in Utah yesterday. He didn't say much beyond that he could hear the judge from the county jail where he is being held. His defense attorney did most of the talking. It's the attorney that Menard hired days after he was charged with sex crimes and days before he was able to surrender himself to authorities in Utah. Matthew Menard is one of 3 men facing charges in connection to the disappearance of Elisa Petrov. Court records show that Menard allegedly had sexually graphic conversations with the teenager. He allegedly solicited sex, sodomy, and child sex abuse material from a 15-year-old girl, and they say that he knew that she was underage. In fact, in one chat, police say Menard asked Petrov, quote, "Are you secretly 15? And Petrov replies, WTF, of course, yepers, I'm actually in middle school. Menard later said, quote, "But for real though, when we meet, we gonna be expletive all night." Court documents show that Menard also allegedly told the girl to send nude pictures of herself, with Menard referring to himself as, quote, "Daddy." The state of Utah filed charges against Menard on May 16th. A no bail warrant was issued for Menard on May 20th. Now, we learned that while the state of Utah was in the process of levying those charges, Menard appeared to be living the fast life in Miami. These are images posted to Facebook by someone who is close to Menard. The video was posted on Sunday, May 19th. It appears to be a recap of a pretty eventful weekend. We took screen grabs from that video. We blurred other faces but Menard. And here he is on the bow of a boat. All of this happening as Elisa Petrov is missing and her family is praying that she would come home. Now, we know that Matthew Menard seems to come from a life with a good income. A now deleted LinkedIn shows that he worked for a tech company. It is unclear if he's still employed in the wake of the accusations he's now facing in Utah. Well, you don't need me to tell you, because if you watch our content on Law&Crime, you know that things can feel a bit crazy out there right now. That's why I'm excited to tell you about a product that we at Law&Crime created. It's called the Law&Crime Safety Bracelet. This is a bracelet that you can wear around your wrist or keep in your car or in your purse. It includes multiple items that can give you actual peace of mind. This is what I mean. It has a whistle, which has a classic high pitch, which is great for drawing attention when it matters most. There's a compact flashlight that can be used to guide you in the dark or signal for assistance, and a seatbelt cutter that you can use in case of a car emergency, and a handy utility knife that can be used for a lot of different things, and that is just to name a few. So right now you can go to truecrimegoods.com, use the promo code SAFETY15 to get 15% off your bracelet, and then once you get it, you can carry it with confidence wherever you go. We also know that Menard had allegedly come up with a plan to get Elisa to meet him in Las Vegas, where he said he was traveling for work. He told her to go hang out there until he arrived in late May. He then said they would go to Los Angeles before returning to where he lives in Miami. Menard also allegedly told the girl that they would be able to hide her identity by saying the 15-year-old was his daughter. Remember, this was also a man who had her call him daddy. In fact, when he solicited what police say is child sex abuse material, he allegedly told Petrov to, quote, "send a pic for daddy." Social media shows that Matthew Menard was also someone who seemed to come from a good family. Here are some images of him from Thanksgiving. Again, we've blurred the faces of the other people who are in the pictures.
To text back.
And it also appears he had a serious girlfriend. You can see them here doing what young couples do in this video. It's unclear if she had any idea of what her boyfriend would be charged with and accused of. Even though Menard had a warrant out for his arrest on May 20th for some very serious crimes, it wasn't until May 28th that police say he self-surrendered. Likely, that was the work of his defense attorney, who we saw in the WebEx court appearance that Matthew Menard had yesterday. Menard is facing charges of aggravated sexual exploitation of a minor, enticement of a minor, and criminal solicitation of a minor. Here's what we know about the two other men facing charges in connection to Elisa Petrov. 41-year-old Samuel Mitchell of Harriman, Utah is charged with sexual exploitation of a minor. He will make his first court appearance tomorrow on Wednesday, according to court records. Then you have 37-year-old William Glines, who is in custody in Texas City, Texas. Police say they found his conversations with Petrov after the girl went missing, and they discovered some of the conversations that men were having with her online. Glines is facing charges in both Texas and Utah. Menard and Mitchell are only facing charges in Utah at the time of this recording. As for Petrov, what a sigh of relief for her family, a sigh of relief for everyone who's been following the story, who may have been worried that it would have had a very, very difficult ending. But this 15-year-old showed up at a police station in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Sunday night. She had been listed as an endangered runaway since she vanished on April 21st. Her family flew to Colorado Springs to be reunited with her. And of course, there are a ton of questions about where Petrov was for the last 6 weeks and if she was with anyone else during the time that she was in Colorado. There's also just questions about how she was able to get to Colorado. It's unclear what kind of details we'll get from the authorities going forward because Petrov is a minor and she is now safely back with her family. Police did say it appeared that she was in good health. There is a statement, though, we have from Petrov's dad on social media. Nikolai Petrov has been vocal in getting the word out about his daughter since she vanished. He launched a website as a place for people to go with tips and to get information if they were to see her. Nikolai Petrov on Facebook wrote, quote, "Thank you everyone for all your help. Thank you for sharing the news. Thank you for following, and thank you for the tips. Elisa walked into a police station today on June 1st, 2025. She was gone for almost 6 weeks." He also thanked law enforcement for their work in searching for his daughter. Talk more about this case, someone who has been covering it locally in the Salt Lake City area, KUTV2 News anchor Brian Schnee. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. And the last time that we spoke, it was still unclear where Elisa Petrov was, if she was going to come home to her family. And I think about something you said, like her potentially showing up at the back door, what that would be like for that family. And just a couple days later, she turns up at a police station in Colorado Springs. What was your reaction when you first heard that that's what happened?
Well, the whole thing's been bizarre. So I wasn't really surprised that something a little bit strange would be the closing circumstance for part of this situation. Keep in mind, there's the whole criminal side. There's all these
Right.
questions and all these things that we don't know about the last 6 weeks. But it was interesting sitting in Elisa Petrov's home with her father. And I asked him, what would it be like to have that knock on the door? And she says, "Hey, I just want to come home." And lo and behold, what was it, 2, 3 days later? Something similar happened. It wasn't exactly to script, but it's about as good of a situation as you can imagine. Your 15-year-old daughter showing up at a police station in a place where nobody was looking for her. So it's a win.
Without a doubt, a win. And there still are a lot of questions because before she was found, I mean, it was Las Vegas and Los Angeles based off of information information we got from the conversation she had online allegedly with Matthew Menard. But then she was east in Colorado Springs. Do we know anything about how she got there?
It just goes to show that there's all these theories thrown out on social media and
Yeah.
in the comment section. I appreciate all your comments, by the way. And all these theories don't add up until you have the actual information. And we don't have the actual information. We don't know how she got there. I think it's highly unlikely she was there by herself or with a friend. I don't see that circumstance of just like finding her way there on her own. I do think there was movement there. And I hope we get some of that information. I know that South Jordan Police was saying to one of my colleagues yesterday that they're really not going to share much after this because of Elisa being a juvenile. I do think there are some answers owed here when those answers are at least figured out through the course of the investigation. You don't have to give away all of the gruesome details. Those are already put out to a T in a lot of those search warrants, which were way too much information, especially for the general public to know about the ins and outs of the conversations that Elisa was having with these men. But I do think there's some answers owed here to the public. The engagement that the public had in this, the interest that this case garnered, not just in Utah, but really around the country. And I imagine people across the globe had heard of this in some capacity, kind of like the Ruby Franke, Jody Hildebrand situation that took place out of Utah and really kind of captivated people for 9 months. This was about a month and a half, and it was because people wanted to know, where the heck was she? And who was she with? And was she okay the whole time? And at the end of the day, she's okay now to a certain extent. I'm sure there's trauma there. I'm sure there's all sorts of things associated with being a 15-year-old and leaving your home and getting into a situation perhaps that wasn't what she expected.
Right. And to think of her coming back now and she's going to, get back to, you hope, some sense of normalcy in her life. How do you do that? It is easier said than done. I know you were last night covering this story and in her community in South Jordan. And you have some great posts on social media of kind of the community and how they responded to this news. Just walk us through what you saw and some of the conversations you had.
Yeah, I was in that community doing some live TV coverage last night for a lot of our evening news. And I've been in that neighborhood before, obviously. I've been in their home. I've spoken to dad there. I kind of got a lay of the land. And it's a beautiful area. It's a tightly knit community where, you know how as media, you're not always welcome in certain places. And that has evolved over time. And it's something I'm very aware of. But when I looked behind me to the backdrop of the neighborhood where Elisa's family lives, I noticed that there were members of that community putting up yellow ribbons on light posts. And I said, well, there's one of two things, or one of one thing really, that this could be for. So we walked over and just introduced ourselves, and they knew who we were because of a lot of our coverage based on what they've consumed, whether it be on social media, whether it be by way of appearances on Law&Crime, whether it be locally with our news outlet here in the Salt Lake City area. They were beyond appreciative for the coverage, which is something that, depending on the day, you don't hear very often. So they said we were doing this because we want her to know when she comes home how much we were thinking of her, how much we were supporting her family, how much we wanted her back here. One of the women that I was speaking to yesterday on the sidewalk of this neighborhood became a little emotional, saying, I know her very well, and even said I knew her very well. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. To our understanding, things are okay, which is beyond expectation, I think, for the circumstance. So it was a little emotional there, and it was really personal with members of this community, something that people normally want to shut off when they see the news cameras come around. And this wasn't the case. And it was really heartwarming to see that a lot of our work that went into constantly putting her face out there and her information was well received, and was evident when you saw the reception in the neighborhood last night, although at this point, when you and I are speaking, Elisa Petrov is not back in Utah yet.
Yeah, because to our understanding, her family was making their way to Colorado Springs, right? Have you had any communication? I know you spoke with her father days before she was found. Have you spoken to him since?
Yeah, I'm actually referencing a message I got earlier this morning because we have traded some messages here. And I asked Nikolai if they had seen Elisa yesterday when they arrived, which, by the way of time of when they got there via a flight and then landing and driving, I'm not sure where they landed, whether it was locally in Colorado Springs or in Denver and then driving down. It's not that far. But he told me that they saw her, and she was a bit scared, and just kind of what will my parents think sort of situation. I'm paraphrasing here, by the way. And that apparently she dyed her hair blonde during this time and seemed pretty happy. And they're going to see her again today. So that is Tuesday, June 3rd. So they've seen her once. They will see her again. And then they're obviously trying to figure out the next steps of bringing her back home. But you said something interesting, is how do you get back to your normal life? I don't know. I think both for the family and for Elisa, so much about Elisa has been put out there. And to the point where to some it would be embarrassing, right? It's a lot of personal information. It's a lot of difficult things to stomach. But it's a good reminder for parents. I mean, this whole thing is meant to be, the reason why we did so much coverage on this is really we tried to hook in the importance for parents, Chris, you're a parent, I'm a parent, I will think about this one forever because of how closely tied I am to it and the importance of making sure you monitor one of these when your children has that or another device. So we do know that the family has reunited with her. I spoke with Elisa's aunt yesterday, who lives in California, and we did an interview weeks ago, or I guess you could say more than a month ago at this point. So we caught up, and she told me she was flying out there as well. Very tightly knit family. So at the end of the day, I think everyone's just relieved. Although the physical sort of emotion isn't there, it's just kind of the family's dynamic. They're not a very physically emotional bunch, but as you know, Chris, you've worked in this industry a long time. Everyone processes grief and these different sort of
Sure.
situations differently. So at the end of the day, you can sense it through the I guess a harder shell of maybe keeping the guard up when some of this coverage is going on because it's a lot of personal details about your family. I think there's a really good sense of relief for mom and dad and obviously the extended family here. And as I mentioned, her neighbors, her community that just want to see her come home.
Yeah, and to your point too, I mean, just as from a parent aspect of it, and you cover these stories regularly, and we do at Law and Crime, where like she's not alone in terms of this family's not alone in terms of these types of cases. We see it unfortunately all the time where a teen is just being a teen, and then somehow they get in touch with people like the men who are accused of some pretty heinous crimes in relation to the conversations they had allegedly with her online. And kind of turning to that part of it, Brian, is we saw Matthew Menard make his first court appearance. It was very brief, not really a big surprise there. His criminal defense attorney did a lot of the talking, and then they decided to have I think it's something like a bond hearing next week on Monday. In Utah, typically, what does the legal process look like in the beginning of a proceeding, like what he and then the two other men eventually are going to go through as well?
Yeah, this was pretty standard. I mean, an initial appearance to just kind of read through the charges that were there, and typically they just ask. I can't remember if they did this with Menard because it was kind of in the middle of everything else unfolding yesterday. But they say, "Hey, have you read the charges? Has your attorney talked to you about the affidavits that are out there? Are you aware of all these certain documents and such?" Making sure there's that communication between counsel and, in this case, Matthew Menard. What we thought was kind of interesting is the entire time Matthew Menard was had a warrant out for his arrest for the Utah County Jail and to appear in Utah County, to appear in the Provo District Court. The Petrov family doesn't live in Utah County, but Elisa went to school there, and her last known location was in Utah County. So there's kind of some of that, I guess, questioning of what were the reasons here. I believe if you
Mhm.
look at Samuel Mitchell, he is in Salt Lake County because that's where he resides. So there's kind of that cross county boundary here where we're just trying to make sure we can keep tabs on everybody here. And then also at the end of the day, what's happening with the man in Texas. So Menard at this point, pretty standard. They'll do a waiver or a bail hearing. Doesn't necessarily mean he's getting bail, by the way. These are felony charges in different ranges based on exploitation and some of the other circumstances with enticement. And Menard's probable cause affidavit, the search warrants, they were very detailed. They were almost, in a way, aiding and abetting to a runaway and harboring a runaway. There's additional charges that, in theory, could play here, depending on how this all works out. So, again, a lot of this is very early. I think that we hope to learn more about not only these three men, but did they have any involvement in where Elisa went after she left? And if not, who else was involved in that? Were there other people involved there? There's still so much to talk about when it comes to this. I just don't know how quick we're going to get some of those answers as the ANSI public or the ANSI media that has interest in this case. At the end of the day, the best part is that Elisa's safe, and just can hope she can kind of reintegrate herself into a normal society the best she can.
No, absolutely, and it's going to be one of those things where you have her, you hope that she can reintegrate, but then there is going to be coverage of these three men because of what they're accused of doing. I know you're not a legal analyst, but you cover these stories, and it's a big development. And when I think of Menard's case, he was the one that, according to the court documents, came up with this plan: meet me in Las Vegas, then we're going to LA, then we're going to go back to Miami, and then it was reported that she was asking people how to get to Las Vegas when she was in Provo. How could her being found and her being alive, frankly, impact his case? And because I think that she could potentially be a witness going forward, and that's a long ways away. But I imagine that it could have an impact on his case in some way.
You're right. And no doubt here, I'm not a legal analyst, and you typically have people better suited on the programs to talk about these things. But there's a very good chance that something like that could happen. But also, she's a minor. At the end of the day, she's still 15. Even though these conversations were being had online, it would be hard for me as a judge to say, let's bring her in here in a trial fashion. I have a hard time even believing it gets there, but that's just me based on a inkling and how I've seen a lot of these cases play out in Utah. I think at the end of the day, protecting her integrity, even though her face was blasted out there for people to see and her information was out there and the conversations, I think there'd be a hard time to see her actually testify as a witness in any sort of testimony against him, because I don't get the sense that they ever met. Now, the real weird part about this is Menard was in Florida, turned himself in. Elisa was east, at least at some point. I don't know if she was east the entire time. Did they ever cross paths? Was there ever what happened between the gap of the warrant to when he turned himself in? I don't know. I don't know if they actually crossed paths in any way, or if this was just purely in the conversations based on the phones and the messaging of let's plan to meet here and then go here. But there's a huge gap of the country we're not talking about here between Florida and Utah. And by the way, some ways you have to get through Colorado to get here. So was there any movement further east? And was there anything? I mean, there's lots of these questions about not just Menard, but William Glines and then Samuel Mitchell and then anyone else that could potentially be involved. But to go to your initial, I'd have a hard time seeing her testify purely because she's a juvenile. And at the end of the day, there are still those protections in place, which is the reason why police are not saying much. That's what they've given us, is that this involves a juvenile. And we're like, well, we know, but there are still a lot of things that I think people want answers to. And I don't know if we'll get all of them, but I'm hoping we get some.
No, and there are a lot of questions, and it'll be interesting to see how police kind of handle that, knowing that she is a juvenile, and it's kind of shifted now in the way that this story is going to be told. And in terms of the evidence, I mean, to your point, I mean, there's a lot, almost too much information that anyone would want to read in those probable cause affidavits and the search warrants related to those conversations that they have. Brian Schnee, KUTV2 News in Salt Lake. It's always great to have you on. Great reporting on this story.
Thanks, Chris.
Join us now to talk about some of the law enforcement perspectives on this is former police commander and the host of Profiling Evil, Mike Kim. Thanks for being here. Always great to have you, especially you live in Utah. I mean, this is a case that's been so focused on your state. Just initially, what was your reaction when you first heard that Elisa Petrov was okay?
Well, I think there was great relief, not only for me personally, but for everybody in the state. I think they breathed a sigh of relief, and certainly her parents would have been relieved. But this really is the anomaly in these kinds of cases, that with everything that we were learning along the way, especially about the grooming that was going on between those three separate men, it had all of the makings of a really disastrous outcome. And the only thing that was the outlier in this was that there was an appearance that she was actively out looking and seeking an opportunity to go out and run off. So the question now becomes, in my opinion, is her motivations, and whether the text messages like, "Hey, I'm running away, don't try to reach me," the actual attempts or the actual success of not socializing anything for that 4.5, 5 weeks, all of that's going to paint a much clearer picture for us of whether this was something that she wanted to do, and three alleged predators were sucked in and participated. And I'm not saying sucked in like they would have never done it on their own. I'm just saying that they got pulled into the overall picture, or if it had more to do with the fact that she was a victim of these predatory events. And again, I don't want that to sound in any way like I'm casting blame on this young girl. What I'm saying is now we have two separate scenarios to consider about what her involvement was, because as we talk about risk reduction, especially in these kinds of cases, there are many things that victims of crime could have done to reduce their risk. It's not victim blaming, it's just the realities that there may have been things that she did that increased or elevated her risk of being approached by these people in these chat rooms and other kinds of places. And so that becomes the real lesson. Again, doesn't take away any of the responsibility of the predatory behaviors of the three men that are allegedly abusers in this case, but it also doesn't take away from responsibility of a dumb teenager whose brain hasn't fully developed, making decisions that could have terrible consequence.
Yeah, and you bring up a point. I think the word grooming is important here because you do see, and not saying that you were, but in terms of like victim blaming, you look at the comments that people have had on this story, and there are people who will point and say, well, she was seeking all of this out, this and that. But grooming is something I think when you look at some of these conversations, and that word is thrown around a lot these days, but in terms of these types of cases, and as someone who worked in law enforcement and you've worked these types of cases, what is the definition of grooming here and how it applies to what played out online and eventually leading to Elisa Petrov running away for 6 weeks?
Well, I think we have to recognize the fact that grooming is predatory behavior. Even if we tried to cast the nicest shadow on it, like I'm trying to convince you to believe my faith tradition over somebody else's. If you're doing that rather than just being transparent and giving people an understanding of what the end goal is, but you're starting very softly and subtly taking advantage of weaknesses they may have, the need for attention or the need to be complimented or the need to somehow feel they are changing someone else's life, all of that is grooming. And in my opinion, it is predatory in nature, not necessarily coercive like we might see in cults, where the heat really starts to turn up after the soft grooming, the love bombing, many people call it, happens. But grooming is still predatory if you're trying to get someone to do something that, if they knew everything that was going to happen, would not choose to get involved in. I often think of a comment made by Dr. Margaret Thaler Singer. She was this incredibly wise psychologist who did a lot of work in cults. And she said that if people knew from the get-go what they were in for and what the cult or the end goal really was, they'd never get involved in the first place. And so that's why grooming is really, to me, so predatory, is that it really hides what the end goal is.
And you look at this young girl, she's safe. I know as of yesterday, her family was on their way to Colorado Springs to reunite with her, which is great news. Her dad posted on Facebook that they were just incredibly thankful for all the attention that, and he was very public over the last 6 weeks in making sure that his daughter's story was told. But at the same time, I mean, now that she comes back to society, it's going to be tough because there was so much attention on this case from a law enforcement perspective, where, I mean, certainly for me as someone who's covered it and people in the media, I mean, there's in the audience, there's a huge interest of like, what happened for the last 6 weeks? How'd you get to Colorado Springs? Who were you with? Were you with anybody in Colorado Springs? At the same time, she is still a minor, and this was a runaway case when you strip it away from the criminal element of it. As law enforcement, how do you handle the attention? And there's going to be a lot of details coming out in the criminal case, but then at the same time, try to protect this girl the best that you can as she's starting now to recover from everything she's been through.
Yeah, and Chris, I might try to maybe modify just one thing because I don't think it was your intent
Sure.
when you said this, but I don't believe that this kid should necessarily be classified as a runaway, even if she chose to walk out that door under her own command and leave, with taking into account that most probable grooming that was going on. I mean, if in fact these three alleged predators were doing the things that are being socialized, we're saying the things, we're having the communication, we're encouraging this teenager, I keep saying child because I still look at this as a child, to leave her home, leave her security, leave her network of trust, and walk away, I have a hard time placing a whole lot of culpability on her shoulders, other than there's just no question she made that final decision to walk out the door, to follow whatever the dream was or the fantasy was. And so for law enforcement, I think the big challenge at this point is to really start assessing what happened. What were those precipitating factors that caused her either overtly or covertly to make the decision, hey, I'm going to leave now? And there is some indication in some of the contexts that I've read that she was even being threatened. Hey, we're going to share images you shared or other kinds of things unless you do this. That takes away some responsibility from the child in making decisions as well, if they're acting out of fear or trying to mitigate something that they think would be much worse. And so I think we have to all kind of take a deep breath, cut the kids some slack. And I loved seeing the fact that in the local news that the neighborhood was coming out and tying ribbons on trees and saying how glad they are to welcome this child home, and throwing their arms open, because that would be a tough thing for you to come back and face, regardless of whether you were abducted in the night or coming back because you decided to walk away. So I think we'll see the community. I think we'll see her friends step up. And then I think we'll see the people that we always see who must have never had a problem in their life, who are going to judge and be critical.
No, absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point on the runaway part, because especially related to Matthew Menard, who's the suspect who made his first court appearance yesterday. He's the one who, according to court documents, allegedly came up with this plan for her to meet him in Las Vegas because he was going to be out there for work. And then it was reported that when she was at a bus station, people had seen her, or a train station, that she was asking for a way to get to Las Vegas. So when you bring up the point, grooming, this wasn't just someone who was like, oh, I'm just going to run away. There seems, it'll be interesting to see how that lines up with as the trial plays out. How does, in your perspective, as we look at the three men, the charges they'll face, and now the criminal proceedings are playing out, how does the fact that she was found alive impact their cases?
You know, personally, I don't think it will impact their cases at all, other than it could have been elevated and they could have had a conspiratory role and then had a charge. If, for instance, if this had gone to the point of a homicide, they could be charged as being a party to that and face homicide charges. But I think the really critical thing here is the fact that the mountain they've got to climb is that they either independently or as a coordinated team convince this kid to leave. And along the way, they participated allegedly in all kinds of disgusting commentary, swapping of imagery, things that were sexually exploitive. And it doesn't matter whether she walked through the doors on her own, all of that happened. Those are separate episodes that could have been included as additional charges inside of a bigger offense if something more dramatic had happened. And we don't know if anything more dramatic has happened. All we know is that she walked into that police department alone. Was she dumped off by a predator who had her for 5 weeks? Or was she wandering around the countryside looking and having a vacation and living off the land, and then finally decided it's time to go home? There are so many questions left that need to be answered. And I'll tell you, we've seen many cases over time where predators have gotten a soft side to them and let a victim get away, or dropped them off and disposed of them to where they could call and get help. And sometimes that comes with a promise of, hey, I'm not going to tell anyone who you are. Other times it's just they get tired of this particular trophy they have, and they cast it aside and start looking for others down the road. But I don't think it changes any of the fact that serious felonies occurred, and this child was victimized by them. And allegedly, the state feels they have enough information to charge these three guys.
Yeah, and turning to those three guys, Matthew Menard next week is going to have, he had his first court appearance yesterday, and then he'll end up on Monday next week having a bond hearing. In the state of Utah, I mean, how likely is it that he could make bond and go back to Miami and during a period of time. To my understanding, he doesn't have a criminal record. So he's accused of very serious crimes. And we've all seen what police say he was writing in these messages to this young girl who ends up disappearing. But how likely is it that he could walk out of jail and end up, leading up to his trial, not having to spend time in custody?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? Is whether that will happen. A couple of things take me back to our earlier conversation when we spoke about why he was allowed to come here himself rather than be arrested locally, face extradition. We don't know if there's been some backdoor dealing going on already to get him here, get a plea, and that there's a comfort level that would say, hey, as part of all of this, we want you to not have a position. That doesn't mean the judge won't say, I don't care what your position is, prosecutor, I'm going to leave him in jail until this thing's adjudicated, or he may get out. We don't know on the others too. I mean, this becomes a process where in most states, the same process occurs, that there will be an assessment made of whether he is a flight risk or they are flight risks, and how that mitigates against the bail structure. And then the bail structure may prevent some people from getting out of jail where others might have the capacity to meet the bail requirement and get out. So I think there are a lot of things in play here. I don't think that any of them minimize the culpability levels or anything else. It just may be whether the judge believes they're a risk of flight or that they're going to stick around, because our Constitution allows people to have the right to participate in their own defense and to be able to work with their team. And so preferentially, you like to see these offenders, even though it kind of bugs us, get out where they can have a solid opportunity to put a defense together, because then when they're convicted, there's less chance of an appeal or other kinds of things. Or if they're convicted, is maybe the better thing to say. And so there are so many chips and things moving around on this board here as we're looking at this that we need to consider. And we have to kind of keep reminding ourselves, don't get too stressed out, because the people that are making decisions aren't doing it in a corrupt manner. They're not doing it because it's easier. They're doing what the bail schedule allows. They're doing what the risk schedule allows, and making determinations that way.
No, well put. And we'll see now how the criminal part of all of this plays out. I know Samuel Mitchell's expected in court at the time we're recording this tomorrow on Wednesday. And we'll see what happens to William Glines, who's still down, to my understanding, in custody in Texas. Mike King, retired police commander and also the host of Profiling Evil. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.